Welcome to Canadian Innovators, the show that celebrates innovation, entrepreneurs, and the Canadian spirit. I'm Jocelyn Bamford, and every week we introduce a new entrepreneur or expert in the economy to tell their stories and unpack the challenges of keeping jobs in Canada, as well as share ideas for economic growth and prosperity. Today on the program, we welcome back Brian Gould, founder and executive chair of Aspen Leaf Energy, the Canadian-based conventional light oil producer, bringing new life to historic Alberta oil fields while cleaning up the wells of the past. Bryan is also a director of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute and an author of growing body of civic essays, The Anxious Miracle, What is in the Wave in Canada, in my opinion. And he's one of the country's more thoughtful voices on energy, competitiveness, and the democratic conditions of Canadian prosperity. Today, we're going to talk about what's new with Aspen Leaf, the trilateral MOU, and pathways in carbon capture, the alarming trend of manufacturers heading south, and where things stand in the Canadian-U.S. trade talks. Welcome back to the program, Brian.
Thanks for having me again, Jocelyn. I'm thrilled to be here.
Well, thank you for joining us. We've got a lot to cover today. Let's start with an update. What's new with Aspen Leaf?
Okay, so Aspen Leaf, maybe just for your listeners, we're a private oil company founded in 2014. We produce in around 25,000 barrels a day of light oil. And the company was founded by myself and three of my former Shell colleagues with the premise that we could take big company sophistication and link it up with small company entrepreneurial spirit and frankly see old assets revitalized profitably to produce the energy that Canadians need in a very responsible way. So that's what we do. We contribute to the economy in a very meaningful way. We employ directly and indirectly around 500 people. We put about $500 million a year into the economy through taxes, royalties, et cetera. And you know, when you look at who's invested in Aspen Leaf, people think about big Wall Street investors, but our shareholders have over the years pension funds, art galleries, college endowments. And when I last looked, our investor base had spawned over 200 Nobel Prize winners. And so, you know, when people think about the profits from oil, they think about, you know, big fat cats, but in fact, we're funding education, medical research, and the arts. So what's new with us? We continue to drill our wells. We offer very attractive returns to our investors. And we're focused on continuing to extend the life of these old fields. Most notably, our biggest field is the original Leduc field that was discovered in 1948. And people are often surprised to hear that we're still producing from that field today. And in fact, we bought the assets in 2018, and we're producing more oil from that field than has been done in several decades. And in each of our three fields, so our rough business model goes as follows, Jocelyn. We produce roughly 9 million barrels a year of oil, and we try and replace those reserves through drilling and enhanced recovery techniques and offer attractive returns to our shareholders. So much steady as she goes with Aspen Leaf.
Oh, fascinating story. Brian, Aspen Leaf has a distinctive approach, acquiring old producing assets and reclaiming legacy wells along the way. Walk us through how that works and why it matters for both landowners and the province. And we just have a minute before we have to go to break.
Well, so for us, Jocelyn, it starts with intent and tone from the top. And so, you know, for us, we're focused not just on profitability for our shareholders, but relationships with the community and producing our energy responsibly. And so we committed when we bought our assets to vigorously engage in reclamation of the legacy assets that we inherited. We didn't create these wells that go back to 1948, but we committed to use, you know, our free cash flow to clean up the sites, which we do diligently. We've abandoned over 2/3 of the inactive wells that we inherited when we bought the assets. And so we're very committed to this. We're committed to constructive relationships with our First Nations partners
I'm
and
going to hold
community.
you there, Brian, because we got to go to break. We'll be right back on Canadian Innovators, and we'll continue your thought. Welcome back. I'm Jocelyn Bamford. My guest today is Brian Gould, founder and executive chair of Aspen Leaf Energy Limited. Brian, before we went to break, you were finishing telling about the exciting and innovative approach of Aspen Leaf. Continue your thought.
Yeah, so Jocelyn, so we're committed to acting responsibly, and that means interactions with our communities, respect for our environmental footprint, and we believe this is all part of being a successful company. And we do some groundbreaking efforts with regard to our First Nations community neighbors. And we're very proud of this in our own quiet way. We don't make a big statement. And what I think is most important is nobody has to tell us to do this. So we don't do this through pressure, through ESG reporting. We just do this because we think this is the right way to run a company, and it works very well for us. And we're quietly quite proud of the way we've approached the business, and it's been very successful for us.
Well, it's a story that needs to be told. And I'll tell you, Brian, a lot of businesses in Canada have that same approach. They don't need to be told. They just do the right thing, because that's how you have a good business. Brian, on July 13th, Canada, Alberta, and the 5 producing oil sands alliance signed a trilateral MOU to advance the Pathway carbon capture project and its export capabilities. Does this signal a genuine ignition of Canada's resource sector, or is there still a gap between what's on paper and getting the shovels in the ground?
Well, let me start with the good news, Jocelyn. So I think the world is coming to recognize the importance, the crucial importance of energy in terms of both not just affordability, but security and reliable supply. This has been exacerbated, obviously, by geopolitical events, but also as we face, the growing use of AI and data centers, the world's going to become even more energy hungry. And so the positive news is I think this is finally being recognized, and we need all forms of energy that are available to us. This would include, conventional fossil fuels, oil, gas, and even coal, as well as some of the more new approaches through solar and renewable. We need all of this, and yes, I think there is a shift and a change. Having said that, I still do not see the emphasis that's required to encourage, the investments that are required. Canada desperately needs profitable capital investment to stem its productivity decline. I still see a plethora of regulations impeding investment. And the Pathways project itself, frankly, makes no economic sense. In my view, it's complete virtue signaling. It's part of a bigger package. And so I can understand why the private companies and the province have agreed to pursue it. But it is a needless investment, in my view, and an erosion of scarce capital dollars.
Especially when Canada emits 1.4% of greenhouse gases. Everyone seems to forget that, and we absorb so much. But the Pathway Alliance itself, 6 of Canada's largest oil sands producers, for those viewers who don't follow it closely, what does the group actually do, and why does its role matter so much now?
So the group has actually renamed itself, JASL, and it's no longer called Pathways. So it was formed with the perception of an existential threat, frankly, from our own federal government. And the fear was the government was on a path to shut down the industry. And that might sound like science fiction in a way, but you had emissions caps and just transition. And so the group was formed in essence to defend the industry and its very existence. As we've talked about now, though, the tone has changed, and it's now more focused on not just sustaining the industry, but looking at ways to grow production, which would be not just beneficial for the shareholders in those companies, but critically important for the province of Alberta, and I would argue for the entire country, through the royalties and taxes that this production growth could potentially pay for all the services that Canadians so desperately need and want. So I think the tone has changed. It has not changed as quickly as or as completely as I would like, but we are at least positively perhaps moving in the right direction now.
Well, great conversation on the resource sector. We're going to have to go to break, and we'll pick it up on the other side more. You're watching Canadian Innovators. Don't go away. Welcome back. I'm speaking with Aspen Leaf Energy founder and executive chair, Brian Gould. Brian, let's talk about something that's near and dear to my heart, and that's manufacturing. Dr. Jack Mintz wrote a concerning article for the National Post highlighting the recent KPMG report that focused on manufacturers fleeing Canada. He wrote 42% of the 275 manufacturers it surveyed have already abandoned Canada, have plans to shift production to the United States. Statistics Canada tells a very similar story, with manufacturing GDP falling by 4.1%, with a net loss of 60,000 jobs since U.S. President Donald Trump began his second term. Brian, what's driving this, and should we be alarmed?
So first, we should be very alarmed, Jocelyn. And I know it's easy to just take the quick and dirty conclusion that, oh, this is all a result of recent tariffs from the United States. But I would submit that Canada has been undergoing a long and steady decline in its productivity for frankly, for decades now. And I ascribe this to three factors. The first is an incredibly burdensome regulatory system, overlap between jurisdictions, rules that sounded good in theory, but you go through death by 1,000 cuts. And so it just takes an inordinate amount of time now to get anything approved to build in this country. And it's not just oil for the oil business, it's the mining sector. And if we can't build things, we can't, frankly, have a manufacturing sector. So I would submit that we need to truly streamline the regulatory environment here. And this is municipal regulations, provincial regulations, and federal regulations. This is tough work, but I think it's vital for our economy. So that would be item number one. The second item I would submit is we're not competitive on taxes. And we need to benchmark our tax regime against competing regimes. And, if you can get a better tax deal in Ohio than in Ontario, you can't blame the manufacturer for going there because they just get a better deal. And I would submit that we need to look very critically at our tax regime and ensure that we're competitive. And, Dr. Mintz would be thoroughly knowledgeable in this regard. But we need to be competitive as a country. And I would submit that we've become very complacent in this regard. And the one that's most painful for me, Jocelyn, is it's actually cultural. It looks to me like we have vilified business, we have vilified business people, and we have vilified success. And so you can't blame an entrepreneurial manufacturer who faces, bureaucratic impediments, a non-competitive tax regime, and then to be vilified for taking business risk and vilified for being successful. Eventually, it's death by 1,000 cuts, and those people just say the grass is greener on the other side, and I'm going to move. And to me, it's a very, very sad story for Canadians, and it doesn't need to be this way.
No, it absolutely doesn't. And I agree with your death by 1,000 cuts. Brian, and in the minute we have left for this segment, what should governments on all levels, municipal, provincial, and federal, be doing to turn this around?
Well, so first off, they have to get serious, Jocelyn, about cutting red tape. They like to talk about red tape elimination. In my experience, not much happens. There's a lot of, lots of announcements, But people don't invest on announcements, they invest on reality. And I would like to see, frankly, a much more serious um, endeavor to truly cut the red tape of the bureaucracy. If we can't succeed at this, I'm not optimistic about future investment here. So that would be job one for me. On the other side of the spectrum, I don't think it would be all that hard for politicians to actually come and make some positive statements about the impact of business, the importance of investment, of the importance of manufacturing, and the importance of entrepreneurialism to our economy. That would go a long way to start to build some momentum and build investor confidence. And I just don't see any politician making those statements.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We've been calling for a manufacturing strategy, an entrepreneur strategy, and a research strategy for the longest time. We got to go to break. Don't go away. Stay with us on Canadian Innovators. Welcome back. I'm speaking with Brian Gould, founder and executive chair of Aspen Leaf Energy. Brian, let's talk about the current trade talks between the United States and Canada. Recently, Peter Navarro, the White House senior counselor for trade and manufacturing, had this to say. Let's take a listen.
It's screwy, and we wind up with huge trade deficits, we lose jobs, wages go down. So that's the subtext. Now, Canada, going back to the first term, Chris, when Donald Trump got elected in 2016, Wilbur Ross and I were designated as the guys that started negotiating with Canada before we got the trade representative. And I can tell you that of all the people that I've dealt with on trade, Canada, love the people, but their negotiators, some of the most dishonest people I've ever met. They stab you in the back. And what they're doing with this particular set of tariffs is they have these enormous dairy tariffs, like triple-digit dairy tariffs. They refuse to back down on. They're screwing us in terms of hard alcohol. We have good alcohol distillers. And they're screwing us on auto parts, and they're doing it in a discriminatory way, which is why we're using this thing called 338, to the point where they're doing stuff to us at the same time that they're inviting the Europeans in wide open to their market. So the president says, no, this is not cutting it. And so what we did was we put tariffs on the three things in question, but because of the way it works.
Brian, your reaction?
So my first reaction is every business deal has a component of relationships to it. And my advice would be not to rise to any kind of name calling or trash talking. And frankly, we are our own worst enemy, in my view, in this regard. And I think Mr. Navarro refers back to, frankly, Justin Trudeau leaving a G7 meeting and trash talking the president. And these statements are absorbed in the White House, and whether you like it or not, they have a big impact. Your premier, Mr. Ford, has had a dramatic impact on the relationship, and he needs to stop his trash talk and the nonsense about cutting off energy supplies to the U.S. This is terribly counterproductive. Elbows up is counterproductive. Talking about not traveling to the U.S. is counterproductive, and frankly, banning alcohol sales is having a dramatically negative impact. So if Canadians want a trade deal, which I would submit we vitally need, we need to stop with the trash talk, and we should engage in serious conversations with the administration.
Yes, I absolutely agree. You would never treat your largest customer, if you're a business person, in this way and then expect to get another deal. Brian, if you could give some advice to the Prime Minister to get a trade deal, what would it be?
Well, so first off, I would actually have an open conversation with Canadians about the situation. Uh, the one thing I see with this prime minister is all seems like smoke and mirrors and behind the scenes. And I think we need to have an open conversation about some of the legitimate concerns that the U.S. has. They refer to supply management. This has been an issue for Canadians for a long time. We pay an exorbitant amount for our dairy products in this country, and we should have an open and honest conversation amongst ourselves about these issues, regardless of the trade negotiations with the United States. That would be advice number one: is speak openly and honestly to Canadians about the situation and what our choices and options are. And the second is actually go to the US with a serious set of proposals. And from what I hear from my sources, that doesn't happen. So those would be the two pieces of advice: get serious, stop ragging the puck, and go get a deal done.
Yeah, and I'm hearing the same thing from our contacts in the US that there aren't serious trade negotiations going on. There's not the right people at the table to get a deal, and that impacts all of Canadians and specifically small to medium-sized business. But we're going to have to leave it there. Fascinating conversation with you, Brian, as always. We'll have to get you back on again.
Thanks for having me, Jocelyn.
That's all the time we have for today. I'm Jocelyn Bamford. Thank you for watching Canadian Innovator. If you're an innovator, tell us your story. Write to us at ideas@thenewsforum.ca, and we'll see you next time.